Don't make a scene, Michael. Nobody wants your charity here, Claire snapped, and the room bent toward her voice like a tide. Fork stopped, Emily's face went pale, and a laugh that died too quickly left a buzz of pity and knives in my ears. I'm Michael Carter, 45, from Akron, Ohio, and the sound of my own name being spat out like a verdict is the sharpest thing I remember from that table. I had come to their rehearsal dinner because Emily asked me to come sit with her because there are hands you keep clean for your child even when everyone else has already dirtied the floor. The blue-chipped diner mug she always kept on her mantel. The one with the white star that used to sit between our mother's salt shaker and a stack of unpaid bills. Sits on her shelf now like a joke I can't laugh at, and the mug has a secret tucked inside that Claire never thought to look for. I told myself then that anger would be a poor compass and patience a sharper tool. People turned toward me as if I would beg. Instead, I stood, set my napkin on the table, and felt the heat in my chest like an engine revving for something I had not yet decided was lawful or kind. You paid for everything, Michael? Vanessa the planner said from the doorway, her voice small and technical, as if the facts could be measured into truth. Claire smirked and said, "He pays for us. That's his cross to bear. He should be grateful." And in the hush of the room I saw Emily shrink into the booth, like a child who had learned too early that adults could choose cruelty for no reason they cared to explain. I could hear the brittle applause that followed Claire's performance as if it were a stage trick, and the sound of my own breath tasted like pennies and betrayal. In the 100-yard sprint between the kitchen and the parking lot of that diner, I imagined everything I'd given them. College tuition wired in the dead of night under a name they used to call me, the repairs on Dad's rusted truck, the checks left under doormats so no one would ask where the money came from, and I had the receipts. I had a thumb drive hidden in the base of that blue mug, an invention of habit and spite. A cheap gift turned vault, a porcelain lie with a metal secret. The hint I let fall in my head then was simple and cold. Paper trails don't forget, and neither do tiny, thoughtful containers. Money is a ledger and a mirror. Give enough, and people will use both to look away. That thought lived like a live wire. I did not speak it out loud because some things ring truer in silence. I left before anyone could see me cry because there are dignities you keep for yourself, and I drove past the rusted stop sign on Route 18 with the radio cutting in and out and the sky a low blue bruise. My phone hid the photograph of the mug on my lock screen, the image of its chip where our mother's name had been scrawled years ago, and for the first time since I'd started paying for other people's lives, I cataloged each invoice into a folder labeled with a date and a name. I sat in my truck until the engine cooled and the diner lights blinked like eyes closing on a long, deliberate lie, and I let the humiliation settle into the muscles in my back so it could be wielded instead of cradled. People think revenge is a fireworks display, loud, bright, and quick. It isn't. Revenge is long, it is arithmetic, it is patience with a ledger and a plan. I typed one sentence into the Notes app, receipts, conversations, timestamps, back up to cloud. Copy the mug, wait. The sentence felt like a vow and a threat at once. I packed the mug with a towel and slipped it into my coat, feeling absurd and ferocious at the same time, like a man holding a talisman and a weapon that were the same thing. The plan in my head was not violent, and it did not need to be. It was legal, surgical, and public. The sort of justice that would use facts and the world's appetite for spectacle to do the work I used to think only fists could accomplish. That night, when Claire posted the rehearsal photos with captions about family and moving forward, I screenshot the message thread where she'd begged for another loan and the voice memo where she laughed about not inviting me because, she said, it would ruin the aesthetic. I saved every last file to the drive inside the mug, and then I made a copy and uploaded it to a place that would make it spill into public light when I wanted it to. A backup account that only I could trip, registered under an LLC more respectable than the family we pretended to be. I booked a flight I didn't intend to take that week, an outward gesture, a notice that I would not be available on the day she chose to celebrate without me, and I paid for it with the same account she'd been cashing my checks out of. People will always underestimate the man who leaves without a scene. Let them. The days after that were about quiet operations and the thinning of my own panic into precise work. I told myself often that I was a man in his middle years who had been publicly mocked and thus owed himself the decency of not acting like a fool. I took shifts between the office and the small Lincoln that still smelled faintly of motor oil and coffee, and each night I sat at my kitchen table with the blue mug by my elbow, like a small blue command center. I called Vanessa, the planner, under the guise of wanting details for a possible future event. I asked about credits, about the clause in our contract that required acknowledgement of corporate payers and donors. She, proud and hungry for new business, explained details as if teaching a child how to tie a tie. Everything in her voice that day was useful. The name of the venue's escrow account, the vendor's insistence on a payer's signature for final photographs, the photographer's clause that no final album could be released until the contract was signed and fees cleared. I smiled when she told me because the smile was the shape of a trap closing. I wrote down the clause number and the exact wording. The law, when you read it carefully, rewards the pedant. Someone had written a sentence protecting the payer's rights, and someone else had signed it without thinking about the consequences. I called my lawyer, a blunt man with a slow laugh named Dennis, who remembered me as the nephew who changed spark plugs in his driveway when we were teens. And I explained, in a voice stripped of theatrics, that there were receipts, that the blue mug contained a thumb drive, and a lot of things no one should laugh at in front of their daughter. He said 2 words that felt like the click of a lock: procedural remedy. The phrase felt clinical and perfect. I started leaving small, deliberate breadcrumbs. A friend in town, Jorge, ran a small blog and loved the smell of a scandal like it was coffee. I asked him to look at metadata, dates, file creation times, IP logs, and he called back with the exact technical language that would make a layman cringe and allow you to smile. People have no idea how technicalities can feel like vertical cliffs when you are the one standing at the bottom. Meanwhile, at home, Emily called me once and asked if I was angry. She did not know the full extent of the humiliation, only that her cousin had made a face at me, and that at dinner she had seen her father walk out in a way that made her younger sister ask if men could be sad for a long time. I told her I would explain when the time was right. My pulse missed beats in those nights when I imagined Claire in a white dress and everyone clapping for a family that had decided to exclude me. I drove to the venue one afternoon, unlisted and unannounced, and found the marquee man painting a sign for the rehearsal. The projector frame still smelled of last week's corporate gala. I took a photograph of the marquee and the trash can overflowing with floral foam. Then I went home and matched names to invoices until the ledger in my spreadsheet formed a portrait of me that my family could not scoff away. Line items, wire transfer confirmations, addresses, routing numbers, each one a defender and a weapon. Facts are slow-burning bullets, I told the mug once, and the sentence sat in the kitchen like a secret oath. At night, I ran my fingers along the chip in the mug's rim and thought of Mother, who once said a man's dignity was the only thing guaranteed to him that he couldn't file under assets. I would not use violence. I would use clarity and the world's appetite for outrage. I composed a message that would not be sent for weeks, a patient, exact thing that listed the payments, the dates, and the hidden phrase from the vendor's contract that gave the payer control over final media. I imagined Claire's face when the photographs from her own wedding, the one she had assumed would exist and be fed to her followers, did not materialize because the photographer withheld them under a contractual demand she had ignored. The image comforted and terrified me in equal measure. I let no one else see the drive in the mug until the moment it needed to move. I didn't want to be petty. I wanted justice. I didn't want her to lose her life. I wanted her choices to return to her in full with the clarity of receipts. The plan was a machine of small exacts: upload, expose, enforce. No theatrics, just arithmetic and timing. I paid for a different flight that week, a real one, to an island that was indifferent and luxurious, as much a deletion from their calendar as a statement. People say cutting the cord hurts and that it sets you free. It felt at first like both. The tightening was where the trick worked, because people always assumed that the man who paid would also be the one who showed up to take a bow. I let them keep that assumption as long as it served me. Inside, I was rewiring the theater. I sent an anonymous packet of documents to Vanessa with a short, professional cover note pointing out an overlooked clause and asking whether the photographer's release had been cleared. Vanessa, who loved clean conflict, forwarded it to the venue manager with a please advise. The venue manager, who had a mortgage and 2 sick parents, read the clause and realized he was exposed if the credits were wrong. He called the photographer, who called the caterer, and the chain reaction crawled inward like ants to sugar. The photographer, a meticulous man named Greg, dug into his contract and found the paragraph that said the pair must sign the final release for the album, and that the photographer retained rights to release photos only after such a signature. In the photographer's inbox sat a signed digital agreement with the pair's email attached. Mine. I had done what no one had expected and used their own paper to put a leash on them. I did not revel in the fact that corporate logic was crueler than human cruelty. I simply observed it. At the same time, I began the softer work of moral exposure. I uploaded from the thumb drive in the mug a curated folder to Jorge's blog, screen captures of messages where Claire had mocked me, voice memos where she begged for money and then called my offers a charity show, and the invoices that proved my payments. Jorge, careful and hungry, embellished the post with a headline that tasted like scandal and a photo of the blue-chipped mug with a link to a longer thread on a social media platform. The post did what the internet does. It teased, then it spread. Acquaintances who had always resented me for being the family bank suddenly felt justified in their gossip and added fuel. The social engine spun, and within hours a screenshot of Claire's voice note was on feeds with captions that read, unkindly, the family fixer who paid for everything was left off the invite. People love a righteous outrage that has a ledger. A man who pays becomes the perfect tragic figure when he is denied acknowledgement. My phone buzzed with messages from old friends, some sympathetic, some gleeful, and Emily sent a single text that said simply, "Dad, I'm sorry," which felt like a rope thrown across a canyon. The photographer, testing his leverage, told the planner he would not release the final album without the payer's signature, and the planner ran to Claire saying, "You have to call him," like a mother on her knees in a supermarket aisle. Claire tried to spin the moment into a narrative where she was the injured party, claiming the payments had been gifts, not conditions, but the receipts did not lie. Each wire transfer had a memo line and a date and an IP address. A small, overlooked thing, the memo line, became the scalpel that would cut her narrative open. People like to say the law is a blunt instrument. It isn't true. Sometimes it's a scalpel. I watched, silently, as everything I had given them turned into the very thing that could undo the night Claire had ordered. The wedding guest list became a hot mess of inquiries. The venue demanded confirmation, the band got nervous about contracts, and a murmuring cascade of "who paid for this?" started to leak into the group chat. Someone, not me, posted an old video of Claire at a holiday dinner laughing and saying, "Michael will always bail us out," and the internet, faithful to irony, let that clip mutate into commentary threads and memes. "Justice is boring until it isn't," I told the mug once, because anger needs a philosophy to keep it honest. Vanessa called me, finally that night, with a voice that was apologetic and frightened in equal measure. She said, "There are contractual issues that can't be resolved without contact from the payer," and the words were both a victory and a knife. I stayed booked on my luxury flight to keep my absence public. Absence being, in itself, an accusation. And I made sure the muck of their unraveling had a clear exit strategy. Evidence for everyone to see, and a legal lever that could keep photos from ever giving them the narrative they wanted. The plan had become a machine humming in the dark, and now the hum turned into a sound like an engine finding gear. I slept on the plane with the mug in the overhead bin, exactly as if I were packing a memory I had no right to anymore. The day the world I knew split had the smell of sugar and disappointment, and a sky that refused to commit one way or the other. I watched the live streams from the airport bar with a cheap beer sweating on the counter and the blue mug sitting beside my boarding pass like a calm sentinel. The hotel's Wi-Fi ate at my attention while my phone filled with screenshots of the empty foyer at the venue, of bouquets left to wilt on the stage, of the caterer posting a terse statement about unresolved payment dispute. Guests stood in gowns and tuxes and posted stories of being turned away by men with legal pads who recited clauses. Claire, furious and unglued, posted her own stories claiming sabotage, that someone had leaked private messages and photos, and that she had been a victim. She didn't know, at first, that the leak included a photograph of her in the planner's office, signing a document that listed my name as the payer. She didn't know I had set the timing so that when she posted accusations, I would post answers. I released through Jorge and a few careful reporters a packet. The receipts, Greg's withheld photograph contract, and a montage of voice memos where Claire's voice, laughing and sharp, asked me for more money and then dismissed me as the bank. The video showed the blue mug on Claire's mantle in one frame, and then zoomed in to reveal a small, grainy picture of the mug the night she first accepted my check and tucked it on the shelf like a prize. Social media, which loves a tidy narrative, made the packet into a thread and the thread into a story titled, "The Wedding That Was Paid For by the Man Not Allowed to Attend." Someone with a large following made a video that went viral within hours. A side-by-side of Claire's voice note asking for funds and her Instagram story where she wrote, "Couldn't be more excited to celebrate with family." A lie that now looked enormous in the bright glare of public contradiction. The groom, Daniel Hayes, who'd wanted an Instagram-perfect weekend, had his own past come home to roost when a former colleague reached out to reporters with a recording of him promising a sponsorship in exchange for silence about an office theft. And that recording, married to the exposure of Claire's hypocrisy, made the weekend unsellable. The photographer announced on his public page that he would not release photos without proper authorization and that digital albums would be locked. Vendors, fearful of liability and poor PR, issued refunds to guests where they could and canceled services where they couldn't, and the empty ballroom looked, in souvenir photos, like a prophecy fulfilled. People who had toasted Claire's rise now turned their commentary into knives. One of her bridesmaids recorded a panicked message, asking how the family had let a man pay for a wedding and then be excluded. The audio of that message threaded through my headphones like a benediction. Claire called me that afternoon, voice dense and sharp, and begged me to fix it. She used words like ruin and reputation, like charms she thought would work against me. I told her, simply, "You already fixed it for me the night you shamed me in front of my daughter." There was a long, stupid silence where I could hear her breathing as if through cotton, and then she said my name like a plea and I hung up. Sometimes the ledger is nothing more than truth in print, I said to myself, and to the mug, and the sentence felt like the last cool thing I needed to steady my hands. Emily sent me a video later that night of people scattered across a dark courtyard, of Claire on the phone with a planner, and of Daniel sitting on a bench with his head in his hands. She added a caption, "We needed you, Dad, even if we didn't know." My eyes filled, because the scene I had orchestrated had finally produced the thing I wanted. Not joy, not triumph so much as the return of consequence. There was no shouting from rooftops, no vindictive dance. Instead, there was the long public process of correction. Contracts invoked, vendors standing on contractual pillars, social media amplifying what receipts proved. People say revenge is small when it succeeds. That is partly true. But it is also a little like seeing a scar close after an infection. The body does not celebrate, it simply heals. I ordered a taxi to the airport, and watched videos of the florist apologizing publicly. Claire posted a now-deleted story saying she'd been targeted, and the comments beneath were full of links to the payment confirmations I had uploaded. The symbolic blue mug, the vessel of quiet gifts and secret storage, gathered into the narrative like a talisman that had been turned inside out. Someone sent me a screenshot. The wedding cake, baked in haste and without the photographer's final touches, sat under a spotlight in the empty hall with a small blue ceramic coffee cup placed on the serving table, photographed as if by accident. The caption read, "Paid for by Michael Carter." It was a petty thing, mean in its relish, and yet it landed like a bell. It was poetic justice. The thing she had kept on her shelf to mark ownership became the vessel of her exposure. I thought of our mother, who used to say that people reveal themselves by how they treat the smallest things, and I felt the truth of that as a simple, small relief. The life lesson that settled over me in the sunlit airport, as I waited for my flight to be called and the mug wrapped quietly in my bag, was not a flourish. It was plain: you can give until you break, but you only forgive the people who ask for it. I walked away with a suitcase and a blue mug and a ledger of what people would now have to answer for, and I learned the only two sentences I want to leave behind. Keep receipts and keep your dignity first. If this story resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. It helps us share more true stories like this.